Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show. What a year this last week has been. Happy Independence Day, folks. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Before we get into the show today, and I promise I will try to lay out some reasons for optimism here, in the 248 years we've been a democracy, it has never been quite under threat like this. The Supreme Court ruling on immunity could open the floodgates under a Trump presidency. We'll get into that. And yes, we need to talk about the decision in front of Joe Biden and why I still think he's going to do the right thing. Alex, where do you want to get started?
Yeah, you're right about the year. It's been, 5-6 days since we last recorded, and my goodness. First of all, I do want to just thank everyone who wrote in, commented, tweeted, emailed, everybody on the last episode. By probably a factor of like 10, I would say. Easily the most feedback we've ever gotten on an episode. Universally positive. People, Joe, you should know, people thanking you for a fairly level-headed take when there really weren't any other ones out there. So not necessarily the most fun episode we've ever been in, but I think your take was sorely needed. So, hopefully you got another one for us. But first, just want to ask you, what has changed in the last week since we've talked? Just a reminder for people that might not have listened or watched on YouTube, our last episode, we recorded a post-debate episode where you pointed out that the backlash, the media coverage, et cetera, to Joe Biden's performance was going to be pretty overwhelming. I would argue that has happened. So where are we now, Joe?
Well, first of all, it was great to get everybody's feedback because it's so weird doing a podcast. You get into a moment like that, pretty critical moment, and you basically lay out what you think, but often you just don't get any feedback. You don't hear from people. So appreciate it and happy that in one form or another it helped people get through what's been a year of a week. But it's kind of exactly what I thought was going to happen. It didn't matter what the reality was. It didn't matter any of the mistakes or the lies that Trump did during that debate, 90-minute tirade. It was clear from the get-go that one more time the press and punditry was going to hold Biden to a much higher standard than they hold Trump and focus on him and his flaws and weaknesses and his performance. So that was pretty clear to me from the get-go. And therefore, none of the sentiment stuff I was talking about, and I said this at the time, is going to matter a whole lot because, by now, most Americans have been inundated with days and days of the Biden too old, Biden performance stuff. That's just a reality. And, I said, though, at that time that the one thing we know is if any Republicans, first of all, no Republican or very few said after the former president was found guilty on 34 felony counts, hey, you need to get, for the sake of the party and the country, you need to get out of this thing. Never happened. They're not, it never happened. And the one thing we know for sure is that Donald Trump, even if it was a question, would never do what was right for the country. He would do what's right for himself. So the one thing I'm absolutely confident of is that that's not Joe Biden. That's not the Democratic Party. We know that defeating Trump is the most important thing to protecting our democracy that we can do in November of 2024. Joe Biden knows that. The Democratic Party knows that. A lot of independents and former Republicans or current Republicans know that. And I believe that Joe Biden will do what's best for the country, not necessarily what's best for himself or his, what his ambition is. And that may, if he decides that that he's the best shot we have to preserve democracy, he'll choose that route. But overall, that's the one thing I'm confident of, that as he, is clearly now, he's, being asked to make a decision whether to go on or not. I think he will really look at that, look at the implications of moving forward as the nominee, look at the implications of moving forward outside of standing for office, and the outcome of trying to decide who the heir apparent would be, and Kamala and others, and do what he believes gives the country the best shot at defeating Trump and preserving our democracy. I believe that's what will happen here. Which way that goes, I don't know. It certainly looks like in the first few days here, the ship has not been righted yet, and it's unclear. I think I know the George Stephanopoulos interview is set. I know there's some rallies next week and public appearances, but I don't think there's a lot of time left to make that pivot one way or the other. I think the president I don't think he'll take a lot of time to basically put the hammer down on what he's going to do.
Well, one thing you did mention last week, don't pay too much attention to some of the snap polls that were coming out. There have been quite a few since, really kind of feeding into the whole panic mindset. I do want to point out, though, nothing fundamentally in terms of polling has changed that much. It's been a couple point decline depending on the state you look at. He actually didn't lose as much after that debate performance as he gained from the State of the Union, which, again, State of the Union, he came out pretty strong. Debate, he did not, obviously. But the one thing I want your opinion is, you notice Trump did not move at all, or maybe he even lost a point or two. Like normally, when one goes down, you'd assume that one or two of those points flip to the other guy, but he went down too. What do you make of that?
That's the point that I was talking about on last week's episode in terms of looking at the actual reaction during the debate to the people who were watching it, was that Trump didn't move at all. If anything, he moved down, at certain moments. Again, the more people were reminded of, the more they saw Trump, the more they moved, particularly independents and undecideds, moved away from him. I don't think there's any way for him to get around that. Just as, by the way, a lot of people saw President Biden, saw, the question about his age, were concerned by it, but they didn't move that much either. And I mean, in fact, as I was looking at, what was going on during the debate, the undecideds and the independents didn't move down from Biden at all. And the Democrats stayed pretty solidly at a pretty high number, higher the number than Trump was doing with Republicans during that thing. So now the question is, to what extent does some of that get erased? I mean, because now everybody's been inundated with only the downside of Biden, period. I mean, there's been, some of us pointing out that Trump lied his way through 90 minutes and of just insanity. But that's not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, blanket coverage the way the Biden performance is being, displayed on a minute by minute basis on cable, and papers calling on him. I think only the Philadelphia Inquirer looked at the Trump performance and said he should get out. So I think that what's happening is, I don't think you're going to see a lot of movement in the polls. I think the movement we have seen has been incrementally down for both of them, but with Trump, being in most of the polls I've seen shown, slightly ahead. I think the problem may be that both things will still be in play, though, right? Is what I'm trying to say. Trump is going to be Trump, and he's going to be that guy that made those independents and undecideds, the more they saw him, move away from him. And Biden is not going to erase the age problem between now and November. So I think that same cross pressure, if you want to call it, that same thing that's holding everybody in that 45-45 kind of poll with 10 points sitting there, not really leaning one way or the other, whether you want to call them double haters, whatever. I still think in that situation, again, for a lot of the reasons I've talked about in earlier episodes of who's up for grabs and who could grow, I still believe Joe Biden would have a better chance of growing out of this 45-45 kind of mix than Trump, for the very reasons. I'll go into one specific one. You've been talking till Alex says, oh, please, God, don't say that again, about the 31% of Republicans who said they would vote against Trump if he was convicted of a crime. And no, folks, I don't think 31% of Republicans are going to vote against him, even though now he's been convicted on 34 counts. What I do believe is that group, that 31%, obviously has some concerns about a felony conviction, and there have been 34 of them. Now put on top of that the Supreme Court decision on immunity. So here you have 31% of Republicans saying they would not vote for him if he was convicted of a crime, 53% of undecideds in the battleground states saying they would not vote for him if he was convicted of a crime. And now putting further fuel on that for Democrats to raise is, hey, and guess what? When he's president, he can do any criming he wants because the Supreme Court just gave the president, made him a king with near total immunity. I think that's what I'm saying. I still see ways to break into that group, not for 31, but for 4 points here, for this many, for this group of undecideds to break away. And then I still see, even today, yes, okay, so we had the debate performance. Yes, it's true. They're telling you we're in this dead heat with Trump ahead by a few points. It's still true that is taking place with Biden only getting 70% of blacks, not 95. Biden getting 20 points fewer Latinos, not the max that he got in 2020, and doing worse with young people than he did in 2020. If you're in a dead heat and you're 25 points down with blacks, then you don't need, and I've said this before too, and Alex said, please don't repeat that again. We don't need to get to 95% of blacks. If we get to 78, to 82, same with Latinos, if we just raise 4 or 5, 6 points, if you get some of these young people back, not the whole 30 points or whatever that we've trailed off on, get 6 points of them back. So I still see places where, yeah, if Biden says, no, I'm going to stand and fight, then I still see room for Biden to grow. And I still see the argument to some of these people that are concerned about where, the felonies and other things that, yeah, they said they weren't going to vote for him if it happened. They probably meant it when they answered the pollster's question. Will they really mean it on, as we get closer to the election? But yeah, I think some of them will, particularly with what the court just actually, I know it was a horrendous decision, but I think, and it delayed all the court cases if they ever get heard, and even delayed the sentencing in the hush money. Right.
Well, I want to get more into the immunity thing. Look, it's the biggest problem. The biggest problem about is Joe Biden staying in the race freak out that's happening right now and totally all consuming the media. It is very much obscuring the immunity decision. And the stakes of this immunity decision are just like staggering, as you've said before. But I mean, this is exactly what MAGA has been trying to do. Is right, and it's going to get much, much worse.
Well, it's also why they are, are so solidly behind their king, right? I mean, in other words, for them, it's all falling in line. It's all about the power grab, about inflicting, their idea of what the country should be on the rest of us. And they've got a plan and have been building it for years. And it's, and they've stayed in lockstep to get that done. I actually think that what we're seeing now on the Democratic side is healthy. This is how democracy looks. We don't play fealty to the leader, even if he's our sitting president of the United States. And, it's one thing about hand wringing and all the rest, being the panic that people talk about. But the fact is the Democratic Party is not going to just sit there and say, wait, democracy is at stake. Let's just do whatever Joe Biden says or whatever the party chairman said. It's just that this party does not work that way. That's how the Republican Party, particularly the MAGA party under Trump, works. But that's not how this, as I said, I think Joe Biden will do what's best for the country. But I also think this wrestling, this questioning that's going on in the party right now is fundamentally about we know what the task is. It's to defeat Trump and protect our democracy. What's the best way to do that? And if that even means raising questions about Joe Biden and thinking through what we could do, or whether staying that course or changing it is the best path forward, the party and Joe Biden will, I think, choose the best path forward. I think that's what these last few days have been about. That's what the next few days will be about. And we'll see where that goes. But, I think there are a lot of people, Stuart Stevens are obviously from the Lincoln Project. We're both senior advisors there. And I work with them every day. It's tough for even never Trumper former Republicans to understand the way the Democratic Party works, because that party is so, who's next in line, whose turn is it, always follow the leader. That's why their talking points are followed from top to bottom, single-mindedly. And he said,
right. We don't really do that.
Yeah, no. And so he said in the New York Times, quoted, "It's baffling that so many Democrats are failing to rally around a wildly successful president after one bad night. But it does remind me of why Republicans defeated Democrats in so many races Republicans should have lost." So Stuart Stevens, our friend at the Lincoln Project, I think some of these never Trumpers and former Republicans still don't understand how the Democratic Party works. His quote was, "It's baffling that so many Democrats are failing to rally around a wildly successful president after one bad night. But it does remind me of why Republicans defeated Democrats in so many races Republicans should have lost." I think he's right about why we lose races, but I also think it doesn't get to the way we're not afraid to question party leadership. We're not afraid. We have a healthy debate about these problems. Often while we do, the Republicans are in lockstep, particularly MAGA Trump Republicans go into lockstep with a mind-numbing repeated message over and over and over again while we're looking at what's best for the country. Often, we're the ones that actually get together and provide the votes to pass a budget and things like that. We always do that.
But at the same time, it's tough to look at what's happening right now and say this is an open and honest public debate about what's good for the country. I think that's what's happening in Biden land internally and what the president and the first lady are talking about. But if you look at how this is being framed by everybody, I mean, allies of certain people are leaking one thing, opposition is leaking another. I mean, it is not a debate. Like, there's a limit to your theorem, and I think we're seeing how it can, in fact, be very damaging.
Oh, no question about that. Look, the people there are tons of people who didn't want Joe Biden to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. There were tons of people who felt he was too old, or they had, they wanted someone else, a younger generation, whatever, and they're going to take their shots. That's part of how this works, particularly in the Democratic Party. The other side of it is some of these things are legitimate questions that the president's going to have to answer, whether it's by being more active, by getting out there more, by doing the George Stephanopoulos interview, those kind of things. But no, it's the press and punditry that immediately goes into the sky is falling, when frankly, there's not a whole lot of evidence that the sky was falling. I mean, anybody who had focus groups or are looking at undecideds during the debate saw, Frank Luntz, not just me, other people, including the Biden campaign's research, showed that independents and undecideds moved away from Trump. And the early numbers in the polling, it's fascinating. Yeah. So we've dropped a couple of points. I would argue it's much more likely that drop of a few points was not due to his performance. It was due to the narrative and the coverage of the performance. In other words, far more people have seen the stories, have seen clips now of LBJ withdrawing, which is the new one that started on CNN this morning. So it's now that's my point. That narrative is going to impact the numbers even further. And the Biden campaign and all of us need to get in front of that. I think the best way to do that is for Biden to declare that he's staying in, damn it, and join me if you want to defeat Trump and preserve democracy and fight for the rights of women. Or, hey, I'm going to do what's best for the country and my party, and that is to open this up. One of those two things, whatever it is, to do it quickly and for the rest of everybody else, that puts everybody in the position of putting their oar in the water and paddling for democracy, stopping Donald Trump, which is what this is really all about.
So I did want to zoom out just a little bit, because I think you did that at the end. Rather than handicapping who it's going to be, whether he's going to stay in or not, I did want to get to some of the underlying data that's still very much part of this race. I'm curious if, as you were looking at data, I know we're talking about this before the show, but what did you see this week that our listeners might take either a kernel of hope from, but at least find useful as they're kind of navigating this?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this, I think, a little bit earlier, that, the Trump ceiling hasn't risen at all. He's still stuck in the 45, 46 range, which is what you and I have been talking about the entire cycle. You got 46% in 2016 and lost. You got 46.7 in 2020 and lost a whole, 7/10 better and lost. He's still sitting around that 46 number. I still believe that number will decline, that his ceiling is going to go lower for a number of the reasons that we talked about. Again, what's important about the debate thing is, one more time, we're now going through another week where the focus is on Biden and not on Trump. And what I saw in that debate was that the longer the focus was on Trump, or whenever it was on Trump, independents and undecideds moved away from him. So the one thing, this is why I'm talking about getting to finality on the Joe decision thing. The sooner he says, I'm in it, damn it, and let's go, fight, great, because it brings Trump back into the picture. Right now, since that debate, and it will keep going this way through the George Stephanopoulos interviews and everything else, it's all focused on Biden. Now, the good news about that was, despite all the focus on Biden in that debate, he did not decline with independents or undecideds, and he held his own with Democrats. And the guy, again, when the focus was on Trump, independents and undecideds moved away from him. That's why. So one, I think we need to make clear, like, put your foot down, damn it, I'm in, or for the good of the country, I'm making this other decision, whatever it is, and let's get back to Trump being in the frame. Because in the end, that is the contrast. Whether it's a contrast between Trump and Biden, or Trump and Kamala Harris, or Trump and someone else, it's Trump that pushes those undecideds and those independents away. And that's why I think he's not just stuck at 46. I think he's going to push people away and push them back into the pro-democracy column once we get that, which was, by the way, that was supposed to be the whole reason for doing the debate, right? Do it early, make people focus on the contrast between Trump and Biden. And yeah, look, that strategy was a mistake. First of all, it turns out, forget about the performance, debating a liar who's going to lie for 90 minutes without any of the moderators challenging any of it was probably insane from the get-go. So don't make that stupid mistake again. But it's about, clearly there is a way to, and Trump's a huge part of it. Him being in the debate, in the discussion, in the contrast, is a big piece of this. And it's a mistake to allow this focus for day after day after day that leaves him out. It's not about the, the focus on Biden's age that look, that's largely baked in the cake now, even with these numbers that have him at 45. I mean, after days of this, I don't really think that's going to, you let that go for, however long, it's not going to change a whole lot. What's missing is letting Trump talk, letting him, be in the picture, in the frame, and putting more focus on Trump. That's only going to happen after Joe Biden puts his foot down one way or the other and declares for all time, I'm in this thing, follow me, let's go get this guy. Or, hey, I am not going to stand to be, having stopped this guy this long, I'm not going to be the reason he has a shot at this. So we need to move forward. And the biggest thing is to take him on, and let's find the best person to do it. This is who I think that is, or whatever he decides to do that. And let's go. But I think that focus shifting, either two ways. One, the contrast, bringing Trump into this contrast, or two, starting to showcase the really energetic, vibrant others in the party that could step in for the torch to be passed. Either one of those ways is a reasonable way to believe you could beat Trump, but that's what we have to get to. And wishing for your version of what that's going to be is kind of like not reality. The reality is it's Joe Biden that's going to decide that. And again, the reassuring thing is, folks, he will do, in my opinion, has always done and will do what's best for the country, not himself. And that's a hell of a lot different than Donald Trump, who would always do what's better for him and not for the country. So that's how I think this moves forward. What he decides or how this happens, I don't know. But I'm actually really confident that we have an excellent chance of defeating Trump either way. Doesn't mean, it doesn't mean there are big challenges either way. But I do believe Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States. He's not getting back in the White House, and that Joe Biden will be a large part of doing everything he can to make sure that's what happens. And so should we.
Joe, I know we got a lot more to cover, but we're just about out of time this week. Let's save some of the implications of the immunity decision for another week. We'll probably get one of our friends like Rick Hassan or one of the people who know the law a lot more in and out than we do, because that's going to be an ongoing story, and we're going to need to put it up front. But with that, I think we've just about run out of time.
Oh, sure. We can talk about that. That's going to be an ongoing, unfortunate discussion for decades. There is no way to sugarcoat it, folks. As Biden has said, the next president will appoint likely appoint two more or new justices to the Supreme Court. That's the only way. This decision will be reversed. It will stand for all time up there with the Dred Scott decision as one of the worst decisions to ever come out of the Supreme Court. But it will be reversed, but it's going to take maybe a decade more to change that. And the first step would be winning in November and making sure that Donald Trump is not the person nominating the next two justices of the Supreme Court. And so we can talk more about that in the next show, get some guests on that can, walk us through what some of those implications are. But it just, again, I think it helps make the case against Trump and his lawlessness. And for those people who were concerned about what they would do if he was convicted of a felony, I think it helps us with those people to drive a wedge and to make it clear of the stakes. And I also think it puts even more importance on the results and the stakes for the election in November. And in the wake of the debate performance, makes even more critical how fast we get to the next step, which is Biden telling us where he wants to go and getting behind him or whatever he thinks the path is. So we'll talk more about that next week. Thanks everyone for listening to That Trippi Show. This podcast will always be free with support from our advertisers and is part of Resolute Square. Check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show. Leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Just keep working. We're going to win this thing.
Resolute Square.